flock of dreams. On the western coast of Ayr, where the cliffs dropped toward an ancient and patient sea, there was a rounded hill covered in heather, low grass and tiny flowers that only fully opened when the mist pulled back. There lived a shepherd named Eamon in a stone house with a thatched roof, a blue door worn pale by salt and a chimney that never quite went cold. From his window he could see the narrow path that sloped down toward the village, the dry stone walls, the birches bent by the wind, and farther off the shifting shine of the ocean, sometimes pearl grey, sometimes deep blue, sometimes such a hushed green that it seemed to have drifted out of a story. Eamon had a small flock. He was not a man of great possessions, nor did he wish to be. The thick wool of his sheep, the warm milk at dawn, the oat bread he baked every 3 days, and the sound of the bells tied around the animals' necks as they moved slowly through the wet grass were enough for him. He knew every sheep by the way it walked. One lowered its head as it grazed. Another always stopped beside the sun-warmed stones at midday. Another sought shade, even when the sky was overcast. He called them by simple names, names that seemed born from rain and earth itself. Mist, oat, salt, cloud, ash, heather, island. Every evening before the sun slipped behind the water, Eamon counted them. He did it out of habit and affection. He did not need to touch their backs to know if one was missing. He looked over the enclosure, followed each woolly shape with his eyes, and softly recited the final number as if it were a household prayer. 23. Always 23. For years that number remained as steady as the stones of his sheepfold. But one autumn night, when the wind carried the scent of fallen apples and peat smoke from the other houses on the hill, Eamon counted 24. He blinked, started over, and got the same result. The extra sheep stood near the back of the enclosure. Its wool was very white, whiter than foam on stormy days. It wore no bell. It stood utterly still with an unusual calm, and its eyes seemed to reflect the twilight in a strange way, as though instead of holding the sky, they carried a light of their own. Eamon thought perhaps it had leapt over from a neighbouring field, though he could not remember anyone in that part of the country owning such a sheep. He opened the gate and stepped toward it. At the sound of the grass crunching beneath his boots, the animal lifted its head. It did not run. It only looked at him for a moment. Then, far away, Eamon heard the bell of the village chapel, a single deep, rounded note, and when he turned his eyes back to the enclosure, the white sheep was gone. That first time he said nothing to anyone. He made himself an infusion of mint leaves, sat by the fire, and let the warmth loosen his shoulders. He told himself that weariness sometimes played tricks on the eyes, and yet when he lay down in his narrow bed, with the heavy blanket over his chest and the murmur of the sea slipping through the cracks, sleep took longer than usual to come. The next night he counted 22. He looked for Mist, a sheep with a dark muzzle who usually stayed near the gate of the pen. She was nowhere to be seen. He searched the enclosure with his oil lamp, called her name, looked behind the wall beside the well and among the clumps of fern. No sign of her. Unease stirred in his stomach, not like great fear, but like the feeling of having forgotten something important in the middle of a dream. The next morning when he opened the shed, Mist was there, calmly nibbling hay as though nothing had happened. Eamon stood watching her for a long while. "I don't like you disappearing without warning," he murmured, resting a hand on her damp wool. Mist gave a warm little snort and kept eating. 5 more nights went by. The numbers changed every time. 25, 21, 24, 23, 26. The missing sheep came back with the dawn. The extra ones appeared at dusk and vanished before the rooster crowed. They never left clear tracks. They never broke the fence. They never bleated loudly. They were simply there, as though they had always belonged, and yet there was something in them that never quite touched the earth. Before long, Eamon noticed something else. The night sheep were not like his own. Some had wool as golden as straw beneath the August sun. Others seemed woven from blue shadow. One had tiny silver flecks along its back, as if it had slept beneath a winter sky. Another held a pinkish gleam in its eyes, like the inside of a seashell. And when the wind fell completely still, if one stood motionless beside the enclosure, it was possible to hear among their breathing the faintest murmur, as soft as cloth brushing against cloth, or like voices remembered from very far away. After 2 weeks, Eamon went down to the village to see Muireann, the old woman who lived beside the ash tree well. Some said she knew stories older than the church, and that she had learned to listen to the world before she had learned to spin. Others simply called her wise and brought her bread, honey, or skeins of wool in exchange for her counsel. Eamon was not a man quick to superstition, but strangeness had already seated itself at his table, and when that happens, it is best to offer it questions before it begins inventing answers of its own. He found Muireann sorting bundles of dried lavender. The house smelled of herbs, wood, and recent rain. "Your eyes are full of numbers," she said without looking up. Eamon let out a short, tired laugh. "That's exactly what I've brought." He told her what had happened, slowly, without embellishment: the white sheep, the disappearances, the returns at dawn, the new sheep at twilight, the murmur. Muireann listened with her hand still on the table. When he had finished, the old woman closed her eyes for a moment, as though searching an inner shelf full of old names. "There are nights," she said at last, "when the threshold between this side and the other grows thin as the skin of a drop of water. It does not always happen at Samhain. Sometimes a certain wind is enough, or a certain way the moon settles over the grass, or a heart that still knows how to count with patience. On such nights, dreams that have not found an owner wander the roads." Eamon frowned, though not harshly. Dreams? Dreams. Not all of them are born inside a person. Some arrive in the world first, like seeds carried by the air. They search for someone who can sleep them. They look for a mind where they may set down gentle roots. And sometimes when they find no open door, they take on shapes that do not frighten. The shape of a deer, or mist, or bird, or a sheep if they pass near a kind shepherd. The word kind made Eamon lower his gaze to his hands, rough and cracked from work. "I don't know if I am that." "Your sheep return at dawn," Muireann replied. "That is enough." The old woman rose slowly and went to a chest. She drew out a small glazed bowl the color of dark blue night. "Tonight leave well water beside the enclosure, and do not count only with your eyes, count with the silence between one breath and the next. If they are dreams, they will want to be truly seen, and perhaps they will show you whom they are waiting for." Eamon returned to the hill before the afternoon faded. The sky was the color of wet wool, with a pale line on the horizon where the sea held the last light. He did as he had been told. He filled the bowl with fresh water, set it on a flat stone beside the enclosure, and sat nearby, wrapped in his cloak, while the sheep gathered themselves into soft, peaceful little groups. When night descended completely, the air became almost motionless. Not a branch creaked, not a bell rang. Eamon began to count. 1, 2, 3. The moon rose between thin clouds. 11, 12, 13. The water in the bowl reflected a deeper brightness than it should have. 20, 21, 22. Then between mist and ash, a silver-fleeced sheep appeared that had not been there a moment before. It did not arrive running or leaping. It was simply there. Then another appeared, small and dark as freshly soaked earth. Then a third, the color of muted amber. 23, 24, 25, 26. Eamon held his breath. This time he did not look away. He watched the new arrivals draw near the bowl. None of them drank. the surface, though nothing touched it, and in the reflection, instead of the moon, there appeared the image of a sleeping girl in a narrow bed, a braid over one shoulder and a rag doll tucked beneath her arm. The vision lasted only an instant, then the water was only water again. The skin on Eamon's arms rose beneath the wool of his cloak. Another sheep lifted its head. In its eyes shone a lit kitchen, an empty chair, and an old man dozing by the fire. In another he saw a boy in a boat, letting the current carry him without rowing. In another, a field of bluebells beneath an impossible dawn. Then Eamon understood without understanding completely. These creatures were not lost. They carried destinations, or perhaps comforts, or perhaps small gifts that the night was trying to distribute with the delicacy of a mother covering a child without waking him. He stayed there very late, watching the glow come and go in their eyes. None of the strange sheep seemed restless. There was in them an ancient patience. They were waiting. That was all, waiting. When at last the cold crept into his knees and forced him to stand, Eamon counted again. 27. He looked once more. 28. At one side of the enclosure, nearly absorbed into the shadow of the wall, stood a sheep unlike all the others. Its wool was pale grey, like mist over the sea before dawn. No images showed in its eyes. It did not approach the bowl. It only watched him. And Eamon felt with a soft and bewildering certainty that this one wasn't seeking a child in the village, nor a fisherman, nor an old woman. This one had come for him. That night he did not fall asleep at once. He lay down, but sleep remained at a distance, like a timid visitor on the other side of the door. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the grey sheep in the shadow of the enclosure, still and attentive. There was no fear in the memory of it. There was something deeper, a kind of summons perhaps, or a question asked without words. The sea breathed behind the house. The beams in the roof creaked now and then. The embers shifted in the hearth with little red sighs. Eamon lay on his back, hands folded over his chest, until at last exhaustion loosened his body. Then he dreamed. He dreamed of a plain of luminous grass. It was not the familiar green of pasture after rain, but a calmer green, as though the light rose from below. There were no fences there, no roads. Sheep were scattered across it, hundreds of them, and yet not a single bell could be heard. They walked in silence, leaving behind them a faint trail of glow that vanished almost at once. Far beyond, on the horizon, rose rounded hills covered with ancient burial mounds. On one of them grew a white thorn tree in bloom. The grey sheep was waiting for him beside that tree. Eamon approached without haste. In the dream, his legs moved with the easy strength of youth, without the weight of winters gathered in them. When he came near, the animal lowered its head, and in its eyes he saw a clear image, a room he knew well. His own room, the same narrow bed, the same window lashed by salt. But it was not empty. In the chair by the hearth slept a woman with dark hair gathered into a thick braid. A blanket lay over her legs and a closed book rested in her lap. The fire lit her profile with a domestic tenderness, calm and old and familiar. Eamon felt a soft ache. Not painful, but like the memory of a perfume one had believed forgotten. He recognized the woman even before speaking her name within the dream. Nessa. 9 years had passed since Nessa died at the end of a long winter. It had not been a loud death. She had gone the way the tide goes out, withdrawing little by little the strength from her hands, the warmth from her brow, the voice that one afternoon had still been clear and by the neck seemed far away, as though it came from a road wrapped in mist. Since then, Eamon had learned to live alone. He had arranged his grief until it lay quiet. He had folded it like a blanket and placed it in a corner of the soul where it would not interfere with the daily passing of hours. He had not stopped loving her. He had simply stopped expecting to find her in ordinary things. And now there she was, asleep in the chair of his room, wearing that serenity he had loved so much. The image in the grey sheep's eyes dissolved, but the dream did not end. In its place appeared a path through ferns. The sheep began to walk, and Eamon followed. The air smelled of wild apple, damp earth, and distant smoke. Ruins covered in moss rose between the hills. Here and there came the sound of an unseen stream. Everything seemed to belong to the same night, and to many different nights at once. They came to a small valley where a ring of ancient stones rested beneath the light of an immense moon. In the center of the circle lay a black pool, still as a bottomless mirror. As he approached, Eamon saw that it did not reflect the sky, but shifting scenes. A child building a flute from reed, a widow opening the windows of her house for the first time in years, an old sailor sleeping without storms, a young girl running along a beach carrying a newborn lamb in her arms. Each image lasted only long enough to leave behind a wake of tenderness. The grey sheep stopped beside the water. This time, instead of revealing a scene, it lifted its muzzle toward him, and Eamon understood something without anyone having to explain it. Dreams were not always wishes. Sometimes they were shelter. Sometimes they were gentle farewells that wakefulness did not know how to grant. Sometimes they served to return for a few hours what the world had taken too soon. He awoke before dawn with quiet tears at his temples. He was not sobbing. There was no despair, only an emotion so calm it felt like fine rain falling on thirsty earth. He sat up, pulled on his boots, and went out to the pen while it was still night. The moon was already sinking behind the low clouds. He counted quickly. 23. Only his usual 23 sheep. On the stone, the bowl was empty. That day he led the flock up to the high meadows, where the grass held moisture better. While the sheep grazed, Eamon sat on a warm rock and let the wind pass across his face. He thought of Nessa. He thought of her laughter, of the songs she barely murmured while kneading bread, of the habit she had of touching the rim of every cup with 2 fingers before serving it. He remembered something he had not remembered in years, the way she always fell asleep before him with a deeper breath on the 3rd exhalation. That tiny detail brought him an unexpected peace. He did not feel his grief returning. He felt rather that a closed room had been aired out. At dusk he went down to the village and entered Maeve's shop, where candles, flour, heather soap, and coloured ribbons were sold. Maeve's daughter, a freckled little girl named Orla, was sitting on a bench with great seriousness, her feet not touching the floor. "She doesn't want to sleep," said Maeve when she saw him. "For a week now she's been saying that her dreams stay at the window and do not dare come in." Orla nodded solemnly. "I see lights outside," she whispered, "like someone walking around with very tiny lanterns." Eamon looked at the child and felt a gentle shiver, not from cold, from recognition. "Do they frighten you?" he asked. "No," she answered after thinking, "but I think they're looking for something." So Eamon told her simply about his flock, about the numbers that changed, and about the sheep that were not always entirely sheep. He did not mention Nessa. That belonged to another room, another intimacy. But he did tell them about the bowl of water and the images that shone in the eyes of the night visitors. Maeve listened with an expression half skeptical, half hopeful. Orla, on the other hand, listened like someone recognizing a melody. "Last night I dreamed of a hill covered in wool," the girl said. "They weren't clouds, they were sleeping sheep, and one of them looked at me like it knew me." Eamon felt a peace click into place where before there had been only mist. "Perhaps tonight you should leave the window slightly open," he said gently, "and place a bowl of milk or water on the sill. Sometimes dreams only need to be told they may come in. Maeve smiled more with her eyes than with her mouth. You sound like Murin. That worries me a little, he admitted. The shopkeeper laughed softly, and the girl laughed too. The story spread through the village, the way small things spread in places where everyone knows who lit the first fire. Before long, remarks began to reach him. Old Aileen had slept straight through the night for the first time since the previous winter. Tom the fisherman dreamed of a shoal of fish shining beneath calm waters and woke with a new peace, as though the sea had returned something to him. A pregnant woman said she had seen in sleep a meadow covered in bluebells and no longer feared the pain of childbirth so much. No one declared anything with certainty. In old villages, even wonder is handled with tact. But everyone began leaving little bowls beside their doors, and some of the children insisted on counting the animals in the fields before bed. That very night, Eamon found 30 sheep in his enclosure. Not all of them were still. 2 wandered near the wall. One, very small, had lain down beside Oat as though they had been friends all their lives. Another had wool the color of the sky when evening fades out. One more carried a soft greenish glow, like the light that sometimes trembles over the marshes. Eamon watched them with a mixture of reverence and growing familiarity. It no longer seemed disorderly to him. He was beginning to understand that his sheepfold had become a kind of harbor. He set out the bowl of water again. This time he also brought a little salt and a piece of bread. He did not know whether dreams ate, but in his land, hospitality did not depend on the hunger of the guest. He sat beside the wall and waited. After a while, the grey sheep returned. It did not emerge from nowhere. It came walking from the darkest end of the enclosure, as though it had crossed through a gate that existed only for it. It stopped before Eamon and held its head high. I thought about you all day, he told it, feeling foolish and sincere at once. The sheep did not move. This time, in its eyes, there appeared a coastal path, the trail leading north to a cove of smooth stones. Eamon knew that place well. Nessa and he had gone there many times in summer when they were young and the world had seemed wider. The image changed. The cove, but at night. Low tide, moonlight touching the rims of the rocks. Then nothing. Eamon understood that he had to go. He did not rise at once. He remained a little longer beside the enclosure, listening to the soft rustle of the dream sheep, as if each one carried in its chest the breathing of someone from the village. The air smelled of salt, cold grass, and peat burning in fire chimneys. At last he stood, tightened his cloak, and set out down the path. The moon lit only what was necessary. The stones of the trail gleamed with moisture. On one side lay dark heather, on the other the long descent of the hill toward the sea. Eamon walked carefully, accompanied by the steady sound of the waves against the cliffs. When he reached the cove, the tide was indeed low. The rounded stones shone like the backs of sleeping seals. Farther out, the water breathed in a soft, slow pulse. And there, on a flat rock near the shore, sat a woman. She was not Nessa. She was young, wrapped in a dark green mantle with copper-colored hair falling in long waves down her back. She did not look wet, nor surprised by the hour. In her hand she held a flute of bone or pale ivory, and she gazed toward the horizon with the calm of one who knew the night very well. Eamon stopped a few paces away. The woman turned her face toward him. Her eyes were the shifting grey of water beneath a clouded sky. You took less time than I expected, she said, and her voice sounded like leaves stirred by a light breeze. I didn't know someone was waiting for me. She smiled with ancient patience. Not someone. Many things. Eamon did not step any closer. The nearness of the sea, the hour, and the strangeness of the meeting felt real in a different way from daylight. There was no threat, and yet everything called for care, the way one holds a fine porcelain cup, knowing that beauty also requires steady hands. "Who are you?" he asked. The young woman rested the flute across her knees. "I have had several names. Here, long ago, they called me Fia. In the inland hills, they gave me another, and beneath the mounds, I am called something else still. But Fia will do." The wind barely stirred the edge of her mantle. Eamon saw then that the hem was embroidered with tiny silver spirals like the old markings carved into certain standing stones at crossroads. "Are you one of the IOC?" he asked carefully. Fia tilted her head, neither proud nor denying it. Of the side that remembers and the side that dreams, it is not always easy to separate the two. It seemed to Eamon like the kind of answer found in old tales. Strangely enough, that reassured him. "Are the sheep that appear in my pen connected to you?" "They are not mine," she answered. "Dreams do not belong even to those who dream them. They only pass through. But I watch over certain roads, and this autumn, one of those roads has crossed your meadows." The tide whispered among the stones. High above, a cloud drifted across the moon, and the entire cove seemed to inhale. Fia continued. "There was a time when people knew how to receive a dream the way they received bread, rain, or an unexpected guest. They left a gesture, a silence, a word of welcome. They understood that the night brings more than darkness, but each year there are more doors shut from the inside, more weariness that does not know how to rest, more grief that cannot find a shape in which to fall asleep. The good dreams, the healing dreams, the mending dreams are left without a home." Eamon thought of the tense faces he had been seeing in the village. The blacksmith's wife awake late beside her sick child. Tom the fisherman, still carrying the storm inside his chest even on calm days. Maeve counting coins and worries in the light of a small candle. Orla staring toward the window. "And they take the shape of sheep?" he asked. Fia smiled. "Near you, yes. You are a shepherd. Your heart knows the rhythm of gathering, protecting, and counting without haste. Dreams are delicate. They need forms that will not startle the one who sees them. Besides, sheep understand the passage between wakefulness and rest better than many creatures do. They know how to remain in a flock, and yet each one keeps its own silence." Eamon looked out at the sea. The dark line where the water ended and the sky began had nearly disappeared. "Why me?" The answer took a little while. "Because you do not close the door entirely when you miss someone," said Fia. "Because your grief did not turn to stone. Because you still keep counting. Because you still notice when one is missing." Those last words touched him with a soft sting. He felt quiet. The sound of the ocean filled the space without disturbing it. "The grey sheep," he said after a moment. "It showed me Nessa." "Yes." "Was that a gift?" Fia lowered her gaze to the flute. "It was a possibility, a dream waiting for its owner. Dreams know how to seek the shape by which each soul may be comforted. Some are given luminous fields, others a childhood returned for a single night. To you they brought a threshold where love and memory could sit together without hurting one another." Eamon felt gratitude. Not loud gratitude, but the kind that spreads inwardly like the warmth of simple soup after the cold. "Then thank you," he said. Fia nodded as though accepting the thanks on behalf of something vaster than herself. They remained silent for a while. Then the young woman lifted the flute and played 3 notes so soft they did not seem meant for the ears. Rather, they awakened something in the skin, a sensation of moss, of running water between stones, of branches bowing as night passed through them. Across the surface of the sea appeared tiny lights, dozens, perhaps hundreds, dancing for an instant before fading. "Those are dreams that have already found where they belong," Fia murmured. "They return by another road." "And the ones that do not find anyone?" She looked at him with a sadness that was serene rather than sorrowful. They unravel, they become mist. Sometimes they feed the flowers of the thorn tree. Sometimes they settle on the wings of winter robins. Nothing beautiful is ever truly lost, but it is a sorrow when a dream of comfort cannot reach the one who needs it. Eamon thought of the village as he never had before, not only as a cluster of houses and neighbouring lives, but as a weaving of sleeplessness, longing, and invisible fatigue. He thought perhaps each person moved through the world wrapped in unlived dreams, just as the sea advances, carrying fish no one can see from shore. "What is expected of me?" he asked. Fia played another note on the flute, single, long, and thin. "Nothing you are not already doing. Count. Watch. Leave water. Do not be afraid. And when you understand whom one of them is calling, open the way with a word or a gesture. Humans trust small things more than they trust wonders." The cloud moved on, uncovering the moon. Silver light fell over the stones, over Fia's mantle, over Eamon's still face. "How long?" he asked. "Until this season passes. Until the wheel turns a little more. Or until someone else learns to look as you do. Paths change." The answer did not weigh on him. It was enough. Before he could ask another question, Fia rose to her feet. Her bare feet touched the rock with such natural ease that Eamon thought perhaps the cove itself recognized her. She took 2 steps toward the water. "It is late," she said. "There is an old woman in the house beside the mill who needs a dream in which she hears her sister's voice again, and a boy at the farm to the east who would do well to remember in his sleep that the world also knows how to be kind." "Will I see you again?" Eamon asked. Fia looked back over her shoulder. The moon lit the outline of her profile in silver. "Every time a story finds the one meant to hear it, something of me is near." And she stepped into the water. She did not sink. She did not swim. The tide received her the way it receives a familiar shadow. For a few moments, her feet kept moving across the surface among the scattered lights, until distance and thin mist dissolved her. Eamon returned to the hill just as the sky began to pale. In the enclosure, his 23 true sheep still lay sleeping, drowsy and peaceful. The bowl of water held a single white feather floating at its center. It did not look like the feather of any gull or bird he knew. He tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. The days that followed changed the village in ways so subtle they could almost be missed. No spectacular miracles occurred. No one saw the heavens open. No bell rang of its own accord. And yet in the small life of the village, certain gentlenesses began to settle in. Orla slept again, and every morning she described a different meadow, always with a sheep waiting for her in the distance. Old Aileen stopped waking in tears for her dead sister and began singing as she swept her doorway. Tom the fisherman lost the habit of clenching his jaw even when the weather turned rough. Maeve placed a small sprig of white heather in her shop because, as she put it, it gives a feeling of calm I couldn't properly explain. As for Eamon, he went on leading the flock across the hills, mending fences, heating soup, and counting at dusk. But now each number carried a different shade. Sometimes he reached 29, other times 31. One night he counted only 24 and understood that dreams also rested when the village had slept well. At times he could recognize in a strange sheep's eyes the house it was bound for. Then the following day he would pay what seemed an ordinary visit, leave a piece of cheese, help with a task, or say a simple sentence like, "Leave the window open tonight," or "Set a bowl beneath the thorn tree." He never explained too much. There was no need. Little by little he began to notice something else. The dream sheep did not only bring comfort, some carried memories that wished to settle once more upon the ones who had lost them. One night he saw in the eyes of a honey-colored sheep the image of a young woman seated before a loom. The next day he visited Bridget, who had not woven since her mother died. He brought her a skein of blue wool he had kept for years. That night, Bridget dreamed of her mother's hands guiding her own over the threads, and the next morning she set her loom in motion again. Another night, a dark fleeced sheep revealed the inside of a boat with its nets neatly gathered. Ammon spoke with Seamus, a quiet widower who had not gone back to sea since the last great storm. He used only a few words, only the necessary ones. Seamus slept, dreamed of a sea without violence, and returned to the shore 3 days later, not far, only far enough to make peace with the water. Eamon did not imagine himself master of any of it. If anything, he understood himself as a keeper of passage, a man standing at the doorway of something delicate, and that role, humble and strange, began to settle well in his chest. There were nights sitting beside the enclosure when he felt he was not alone in the task, as though behind the murmur of the sheep and the sea, there existed an invisible web of kind, ancient, patient hands holding the world together so it would not tear where weariness pulled hardest. One late October evening, Muireann climbed the hill to visit him. She brought a round loaf wrapped in cloth and a small jar of dark honey. "Your hills are busier than ever," she observed, glancing sideways at the flock. "Not all of them pay rent," Eamon replied. The old woman smiled with open delight. They sat on the low wall watching the light withdraw from the heather. "I knew the door would recognize you," said Muireann. "I didn't know there was a door. Almost no one does, until something crosses it." Eamon took a while before speaking. "Muireann, do dreams always choose well?" The old woman took her time before answering. Far away, a gull passed white over the sea. "There is no perfect choosing," she said. "There is listening with tenderness. That is usually enough. Dreams, like seeds, know more than we think, but they need soil that will receive them." Eamon nodded. He understood that kind of answer better than he would have understood a more exact one. That night, once darkness had fully closed in, the enclosure brimmed with presences. There were sheep with bluish wool, others almost transparent, one black and shining like wet peat, two small ones speckled like thrush eggs, and one very large golden sheep whose breath seemed to leave a luminous mist in the air. Eamon began to count them with the familiarity of a man reciting the names of stars. When he reached 34, he saw something he had never seen before. Among the sheep, beside the bowl, stood Nessa. She was not a reflection, not an image in borrowed eyes. She was there, standing in the brown shawl she used to wear in winter, her hair pinned up, her hands folded before her. Moonlight fell over her, but not completely. She seemed woven from hearthglow and quiet memory. Eamon did not leap to his feet. He did not cry out. His heart beat hard, yes, but in a steady rhythm, as though the impossible had arrived so gently that the body could accept of receiving it. Nessa smiled. She did not walk toward him. It was Eamon who rose and crossed the space between them with slow steps, the way one crosses an empty church or the room of a sick person one does not wish to wake. The sheep, the true ones and the others, remained still around them, forming a soft circle of breath and wool. The night itself seemed to be listening. "I thought I would never see you again," he said. His voice came out low but steady. Nessa inclined her head slightly. Her eyes still held the same dark hazel tone he had remembered so many times by the fire. And yet there was in them a new depth, like still water when it holds stars. "You have seen me many times," she answered. "It is only that the waking world is clumsy when it comes to naming certain visits." Eamon stopped one step away. He did not dare touch her, and at the same time he felt no urgent need to do so. Her presence was complete even without contact. "Are you a dream?" he asked. Nessa's smile grew softer. "Tonight, yes." The shepherd exhaled slowly. The air smelled of wet heather and faraway smoke. Somewhere among the sheep a tiny bell chimed, though none of the visitors wore one. "I've been all right," he said, and understood as he said it that he needed her to know. Alone, but all right. I learned to mend my own socks, though badly. I burn the bottoms of the loaves if I lose track of them. Heather still shoves the door open with her head, and in spring the thorn tree by the path bloomed so heavily I thought you might step from behind it just to tell me to cut some branches. Nessa listened with the total attention she had always possessed, an attention that did not interrupt, did not hurry anything. I know, she said when he fell silent. Beloved things leave traces of themselves everywhere. Sometimes all one has to do is follow them. Eamon swallowed. It did not hurt. It felt more like old floodgates slowly opening so that still water could move again. I have missed you every day, and I know that too. The words did not fall like sadness. They settled on him like a blanket over the shoulders. And all at once Eamon understood that she had not come to revive what had been lost, nor to promise what could not be given. She had come to settle love where it no longer scraped against the edges of time. Why now? He asked. Nessa looked around, at the gathered sheep, at the hill, at the open sky. Because you have been helping others receive their dreams. Because the one who opens the door for many discovers that his own could open a little wider as well. And because some things can only be spoken once the heart has learned to hear them without breaking. Eamon lowered his eyes for a moment. His hands, large and weathered, hung at his sides with nothing to do. Nessa noticed, as she had always noticed such things, and lifted one faintly luminous hand. She did not reach his cheek. She stopped only a breath away, and yet he felt the whole gesture, the old warmth, the domestic tenderness, the simple intimacy of shared winters, bread, dawns, silences. You did not stay behind, she told him. You kept living. That was right. Love is not offended when someone goes on. Eamon closed his eyes for an instant. A tear slipped slowly and warmly down his face. Sometimes I was afraid I would forget you in the small details. You did not forget me. You only made room to keep breathing. When he opened his eyes again, Nessa seemed clearer, closer to light than matter. But her expression had not changed. She was still herself. Not an idea of herself, not an echo. Herself within the form the night was willing to grant. There is something else, said Nessa. Eamon waited. The dreams that come to your enclosure will not go on looking for owners forever. This passage will close when it must. But what you have awakened in your people may remain. They do not need wonders every night. They need to remember how calm is received, how rest is invited, how one counts with patience what is still present. The shepherd looked at the sheep. Some chewed slowly, others simply breathed, still and quiet. The bowl reflected the moon and a scrap of thin cloud. I don't know how to teach those things, he admitted. You are already teaching them, Nessa replied. Whenever you listen more than you speak, whenever you sit beside the weary without demanding cheer from them, whenever you bring bread or mend a fence or say, leave the window ajar tonight. Peace often enters dressed in habit. Eamon gave a brief laugh, blurred by emotion. You always had a way of making things sound easy. Not easy, she corrected gently. Simple. That is not the same. Then the wind changed. It came from the sea carrying a colder scent, the scent of a season turning. Somewhere far off, an owl called. Nessa lifted her head like someone hearing a familiar summons. I must go soon. Eamon felt the news, but not as a blow, more like the acceptance of a tide already written in the moon. Will I dream of you again? Nessa looked at him for a long moment. Perhaps, but do not wait for me in sorrow. When a dream is a gift, it comes more easily to the one who goes on living with open hands. He nodded. It took effort, but he nodded. They stood for a moment without speaking. Then Eamon said the only thing that truly mattered. Thank you for having lived beside me." Nessa smiled in a way so full of home that the shepherd knew that night would stay with him for the rest of his days. "And thank you for loving me with such stillness," she answered. Then she stepped back. The dream sheep began to move slowly, gathering around her. The grey one came to her side. The golden one lay down. The bluish one lifted its muzzle toward the sky. A fine mist began to drift across the grass. "Amen," said Nessa once more. "Yes. Keep counting." And the mist took her with complete gentleness. She did not vanish all at once. Her figure became translucent, then luminous, then like the glow that lingers in a room after a lamp has been extinguished. At last there remained only the hill, the night, the sheep, and the bowl of water reflecting the moon. Eamon stayed there, standing with his heart full of sweet sadness and immense peace, like a man who has closed an important letter and knows the words inside it will continue to accompany him. When dawn came, the enclosure once again held 23 sheep. The days that followed carried a quiet brightness, not extraordinary, rather refined. Eamon discovered that the colors of the world now seemed slightly sharper. The green of moss on the walls, the bluish white of sea foam when the water was angry without true rage, the reddish brown of freshly cut peat, smoke rising straight up on windless mornings. Everything remained what it had always been, and yet nothing was exactly the same. His visits to the village houses continued, though they became less necessary. Orla no longer feared the night. Now she left breadcrumbs on the sill, in case a dream arrived hungry. Bridget had started weaving again, and was making a blanket with old spirals she claimed to have seen in sleep, though she had never known how to draw them before. Seamus went back to the near waters and returned with enough fish, not to grow rich, but to fill the kitchen with the smell of broth and the sound of conversation. Even the blacksmith, who was not a man inclined towards delicate habits, began leaving a candle lit for a while before bed, because his wife swore the house rested better that way. One afternoon under light rain, Maeve handed Eamon a small linen sachet. "It's lavender," she said, "to put under your pillow. Orla insists it helps dreams find their way." "And does it?" he asked. Maeve smiled. "Perhaps not, but it reminds us to want to sleep well. Sometimes that helps already." Eamon put the sachet away. It struck him how many of the deepest things were upheld by such small gestures. October passed. November arrived with white mornings of frost. The hills grew quieter. The days shrank. The sea took on a deep, clean grey. The dream sheep kept coming, but in smaller numbers. No longer 30 or 34, but 26, 25, sometimes only 1 or 2. Eamon accepted it. There was something natural in that retreat, like birds migrating or flowers knowing when to fold themselves closed. One night he saw Fia again at the edge of the enclosure. She did not step inside. She leaned against the stone wall, her copper hair gathering what little light there was. "The path is beginning to close," she said. "I noticed. You have kept it well." Eamon walked close enough to stand only a few paces from her. I don't know how much of this I truly understood. Fia looked toward the flock where a single silver-fleeced sheep rested between mist and salt. "Understanding is not always the center of things," she said. "Sometimes it is enough to have cared for them." That answer felt right to him. "And what will happen when they no longer come?" he asked. Fia smiled almost imperceptibly. "The same thing that happens when the fire goes out and the house still keeps its warmth in the stones. What is shared remains, only in another form." The first hard frost came one morning when the sky was so clear that every branch looked cut from glass. Eamon stepped outside before full light and found the grass stiff beneath his boots, white at the tips. The sheep's breath rose in small clouds before the shed. Their bells rang more sharply in the cold air. That night, when he counted, he found only one extra sheep among his own. It was the silver one he had seen the night before, with fine wool and tranquil eyes. It approached the bowl, which had by then become a sacred habit, and drank just a sip. Then it lifted its head toward Eamon. In its eyes there appeared the image of the whole village beneath snow. Not much snow, just enough to soften the edges of the world. He saw smoke of pale blue rising from Maeve's chimney. He saw Orla sleeping with one hand open on the pillow. He saw Bridget weaving beside a window. He saw Seamus mending nets while humming to himself. He saw Muireann hanging herbs to dry in silence. He saw himself as well, seated by the fire with a cup between his hands, his face at peace. The vision showed no prodigies. It showed rest. The silver sheep blinked and the image dissolved in gentle ripples of light. Eamon understood that this was a farewell, not sad, not final in a bitter way. A farewell like that of beloved visitors leaving at dawn after making the house warmer than it was before. "Safe journey," he said softly. The sheep inclined its head slightly. Then it lay down among his own animals and closed its eyes. The next morning it was gone. After that, for 3 nights in a row, Eamon counted 23. Only 23. The enclosure was once more the one he had always known. The moon rose and sank. The sea breathed. The bowl gathered stars or clouds according to the hour. Nothing extraordinary came. And yet, as the days passed, Eamon discovered that he did not feel emptiness. He felt continuity, as if a piece of music had ended, but the house still held the kind echo of its final notes. He did not stop setting water beside the wall, nor did he stop counting in a low voice with the same patience as always. In December, the village held a small gathering before the solstice. They lit a large fire in the clearing by the well and brought loaves, butter, baked apples, and a small barrel of cider. It was not a noisy celebration, it was more a way of remembering together that even the longest night has a warm center. The children ran at first and then grew drowsy beside their mothers. The men spoke of nets, weather, and fences broken by the wind. The women exchanged recipes, remedies, and bits of local news. Muireann told an old story about a white stag leading lost travelers toward a lit house in the heart of the mist. No one interrupted her. At one point in the evening, Maeve raised her cup. "To sleeping well," she said with a smile that made several people laugh. "To sleeping well," others repeated. "And to Eamon, who keeps telling people to leave bowls at their windows," added the blacksmith with feigned solemnity. Soft laughter passed around. Eamon shook his head. "I'm not sure when I became an expert in going to bed." "When you started truly listening," said Muireann with no further ceremony. The conversations continued, but those words remained with him. That same night on his way home, Eamon lingered a little on the path. The sky was clear. The stars looked pinned very close above the hills. As he passed the thorn tree by the road, now bare of leaves, he saw something hanging between 2 branches. A very fine silver ribbon, barely moving in the wind. He took it carefully. It was not cloth. It was something lighter, like a thread of frost that did not melt in his hand. He smiled without knowing exactly why. Perhaps because it reminded him of the hem of Fia's mantle. Perhaps because it proved that in the world there were still places where wonder could leave a sign so small that it almost asked to be discovered only by someone who knew how to look slowly. He placed the ribbon beside the white feather in the drawer where Nessa used to keep needles, thread, and mother-of-pearl buttons. Winter settled over the coast with its slow step. There were long rains, there were dawns of glass and dusks of muted copper. The sheep thickened with wool. Eamon reinforced the shed, cleaned the chimney, replaced 2 loose stones in the wall, and went on with his simple life, which now seemed wider within. In the evenings after supper, he took to reading aloud for a while, though no one was there to listen. He did not do it out of loneliness. He did it because the human voice, spoken calmly beside the fire, seemed to put the room in order. Sometimes he read psalms, sometimes old tales, sometimes a page and a half from a book of herbs he barely understood. Then he put out the lamp, left one ember alive, and went upstairs to bed. The dreams he had that winter were deep and kind. He did not always remember their content when he woke, but he remembered the feeling of having traveled to places where the soul could stretch itself without pain. Once or twice he thought he heard distant bells in the mist of sleep. On another night he saw himself walking over a lit hill where countless sheep were grazing. And once, just before opening his eyes, he felt with such clarity the weight of a familiar hand on his shoulder that he woke smiling. Spring returned slowly, the way true things return. First, the earth softened, then tender shoots appeared among the heather. The sea lost some of its leaden severity and took on green veins again. The sheep began to lamb. There were busy mornings full of clean straw, thin bleats, and warm milk. Eamon worked harder, slept less, and yet ended his days with the good kind of tiredness. One afternoon, while helping a lamb still uncertain on its legs to stand upright, he saw Orla climbing the hill with a basket. "Mother sends rolls," the girl announced, "and I brought this." From the bottom of the basket, she drew out a small blue clay bowl. It was new, but it had the same simple shape as the bowl Muireann had given him to use that first night. "I made it with Maeve," she said proudly, "so you won't forget to leave water." Eamon took the bowl carefully. "I haven't forgotten." "I know, but this one shines more." That too was true. The glaze caught the light with a cheerful brightness. They sat for a moment in the grass. The wind smelled of salt and new growth. Lambs skipped awkwardly near the enclosure. "Do they still come?" Orla asked in a low voice, as if speaking of rare robins. Eamon thought before answering. "Not as they once did." The girl accepted the answer without disappointment. "Sometimes I dream of a silver sheep," she said. "I don't always see it. Sometimes I only know it's near. When that happens, I sleep very deeply." Eamon smiled. "Then perhaps some paths never close completely." Orla considered that idea with the utmost seriousness. Then she nodded, satisfied. As the months passed, the story of that autumn became one of those stories small villages keep somewhere between truth and legend. Not everyone told it the same way. Some swore Eamon had received help from the good folk of the hills. Others said dreams had always lingered around the sheepfolds, and all that was needed was an attentive shepherd to notice them. The children added glittering details: sheep with stars in their wool, sheep that left trails of light, sheep able to cross the mist without getting wet. The adults smiled and corrected very little. In Celtic lands, the true and the wondrous do not quarrel much when they share a home. Eamon himself never affirmed anything with pride. If someone asked, he simply said, "There are nights when rest needs help finding the door." And that seemed enough for him. Years passed, not many all at once, but one after another, like smooth beads threaded on an invisible string. There were gentle summers and windier ones. There were winters of rain, and one especially bright winter when frost coated the walls each morning like fine sugar. Orla grew up. Bridget sold her woven blankets as far as the market in the next valley. Seamus began teaching his nephew to fish. Maeve turned greyer and less troubled by coins. Muireann, slower with every season, nevertheless kept a clear gaze, one able to see through other people's hurry as though it were smoke. One late September afternoon, many years after the first white sheep, Eamon was sitting beside a freshly repaired fence. The sun fell slantwise over the grass and made the spider webs between the posts shine. The shepherd now had more lines in his face and more silver in his hair, but his hands remained steady and he still counted in the same quiet voice as ever. 23. It had always come back to 23. Some were daughters of the old sheep, others were granddaughters. The names, in a way, repeated themselves, as rain and moon repeat themselves without ever being quite identical. As he was putting away the little notebook where he kept track of births and shearings, he saw someone coming up the path. It was a young woman, perhaps 17 or 18, wearing a green cloak and carrying a basket. She looked a little like Orla, but she was not Orla. She had dark hair and the attentive eyes of someone accustomed to noticing more than she said. "Good evening," she greeted him when she reached the wall. "Good evening," said Eamon. "Have you lost your way?" She smiled. "No, my grandmother sent me to bring you cheese. She says the best way to ask for advice is not to come empty-handed. Your grandmother is wise." The young woman lifted the basket. "It's Muireann." Eamon let out a laugh, surprisingly bright. The old woman had not come up the hill herself in years. The fact that she had sent someone already meant something. The young woman sat on the wall beside him. For a while they watched the sheep in silence. The sky was turning a deeper blue. Below them, the sea could be heard breathing in its endless patience. "I don't sleep well," she said at last, "but that's not exactly why I've come. I came because some nights, when I pass near the fields, I think I see more sheep than there ought to be. And I don't believe they're imaginary." Eamon looked at her slowly. There was no dramatics in her voice, only curiosity and a small trembling of recognition. He knew it well. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eithne." The shepherd nodded once, then he pointed with his chin toward the enclosure. "Then let's count them together when night falls." And as the sun finished sinking behind the sea, and the first star appeared above the hill, Eamon felt a quiet, almost domestic joy. Not because the mystery was returning exactly as before. It was not. Paths never become entirely the same again. He felt joy because he understood that the work of receiving, comforting, and guiding delicate things onward had not ended with him. It was only changing hands the way an old song passes from one voice to another without losing its essential music. When night came, they placed a new bowl of water beside the wall. The blue clay bowl Orla had made years earlier now rested on a shelf in the kitchen, cracked, too beloved to risk further in the cold. Eithne held the newly filled bowl in both hands. In that gesture, Eamon heard the continuity of everything. They counted together. 1, 2, 3. The grass grew cold. 10, 11, 12. A cloud moved aside and let the moon through. 20, 21, 22, 23. Eithne narrowed her eyes. Eamon said nothing. Then, between cloud and ash, a small sheep appeared with pale wool, as white as sea foam beneath the stars. It arrived without sound. It stood still. It looked at the girl. Eithne held her breath. "You can see it," Eamon murmured. It was not a question. "Yes," she whispered. The shepherd felt his heart settle a little deeper inside his chest. He lifted his gaze to the dark sky, where the stars looked like countless sheep of light grazing slowly over the night. He thought of Fia. He thought of Nessa. He thought of the sleeping houses in the village, of bowls at windows, of children who one day would hear that story and count the dream before surrendering to it. Below, the sea kept breathing. The wind moved through the heather with the softness of a hand combing wool. Beside him, Eithne watched the enclosure with eyes wide open, not in fear but in quiet wonder. And Eamon, shepherd of a hill facing the ocean, understood one last thing, simple and luminous, that rest, too, can be inherited. That tenderness can be learned the way one learns to light a fire or latch a door against the rain. and that somewhere in the secret corners of the world, there will always be dreams searching gently for their owners, waiting to be counted by someone who still knows how to do it slowly. And so, beneath the new moon of another season beginning, the visible sheep and the invisible ones went on grazing together over the wet grass of the hill. And in every house in the valley, one after another, the inhabitants gave themselves over to sleep with a trust older than fear. The windows were left slightly open, the bowls gathered stars, the fires died down without haste. The whole village breathed as one single chest in the night. And beyond the edge of wakefulness, where the meadows never end and the light rises from below, innumerable sheep with soft wool moved on in silence, carrying in their eyes gardens, beloved voices, calm seas, and roads leading home. They sought those who needed them. They found them. They rested with them. And before dawn, they continued on their serene way, as all good things do when they have fulfilled their task and left in the hearts they touched a peace deep enough to feel like home.